You're listening to
Catholic Sprouts,
the daily podcast for Catholic kids that strives to plant seeds of faith. Hey there, Sprouts. Today is Tuesday, August 25th, 2020. It is also the feast day of St. Louis, King of France. Now, this week on the Catholic Sprouts podcast, we are talking about fear. We've already talked about how the world is a scarier place right now and how we need to be cautious, but how we should never let our life be ruled by fear. Now, St. Louis, King of France is an excellent example of how we should not be ruled by fear. And when we give in to fear, it can keep us from doing God's holy work. So first of all, St. Louis, King of France, was indeed the King of France. He was crowned king when he was just 12 years old, but he actually didn't start ruling till he was 21. He was married and he was the father of 11 children, but he was also a very holy man. He worked hard throughout his reign in France to unite all the people in France, the rich and the powerful and the royal, but he also cared for the poor. In fact, each day he invited 13 poor people to come and eat dinner with him. He also kept detailed lists of what people needed in all the various parts of France. St. Louis, King of France, is perhaps best known as a Crusades king, meaning during his time of being king, the Holy Lands where Jesus Christ had lived, where he had been born, and where he had died, had actually been taken over by the Muslims. Of course, Muslims, they aren't Christian. They don't see Jesus as God, and therefore they didn't care for these holy places. So various Christian countries in Europe were sending armies over into that part of the world to reclaim these holy places. This resulted in terrible wars. Many people died. And St. Louis, King of France, actually went to fight in the Crusades twice. He went when he was a young man. He had victories at the beginning of that time in the Crusades, but ultimately he was defeated and headed back home. But then at the end of his life, he once again gathered an army and went back. And this time he actually was killed on foreign soil. He died over there while fighting the Crusades. Now, think about St. Louis, King of France. Do you think that when he went out to fight the Crusades for the second time, do you think that he didn't know that this was dangerous? Do you think that he wasn't aware that perhaps he could die doing this? Well, I think it's obvious that he was very aware of how dangerous this was. And I think we can even say that he was probably on some level afraid that he would go over there and that he would not come back. Remember, this was a long time ago. In order to get from France to the Middle East, where the Holy Land is, it was a long journey, either walking or on horseback. They didn't have modern medicine, so a simple illness could kill you. And also, they oftentimes were short on supplies like food and clothing. So it was very dangerous. It was very risky, and yet he went. So St. Louis, King of France, and many other saints just like him that did these tremendous things, even though they were dangerous and risky, is a great example to us that we should constantly be discerning where God is calling us and that we should listen to his voice alone, that all the voices inside of us that are fueled by fear, that those are not the most important voices to be listening to, that instead we should be grounded in prayer and listening to the voice of God and obeying where he tells us to go, even when it seems a little bit scary. Now, the lesson on fear that I want you to really be thinking about today is this. What are we so afraid of in the world right now? What is so frightening? Well, it's the same fear that people have been dealing with since the beginning of time and since King Louis, King of France, was alive. It's the fear of death. That's always what it is. We should never, ever be reckless with our own lives. We should also never, ever be reckless with the lives of other people. And this is why we take precautions. This is why we wash our hands so well, why we wear a mask when we're out in public. This is why. But we should also not be afraid of death. Do you know why? Because of Jesus. Before Jesus came to earth, there really was a fear of death because death was the end. There was no hope. What was on the other side of death? Who knows? Nothing. But now we know. We know that we have a God that loves us so much that he came to earth, died for us, and conquered death, and is calling us to eternal happiness with him in heaven. Now, we're going to keep talking about this very big issue of fear tomorrow, but my challenge for you today, Sprouts, is to continue the prayer that I gave you yesterday. We can pray it together now, but please make this something that just rings in your heart all day long. Jesus, I trust in you. Free me from fear. Jesus, I trust in you. Free me from fear. That's it for Catholic Sprouts today. We'll be back tomorrow, but until then, continue to grow in your faith and truly sprout into the beautiful creation that God created you to be. Catholic Sprouts podcast will be taking a break next week to enjoy the last little tiny bit of summer. I hope that you are well, both physically and spiritually, and I will see you after 1 week's break.